maybe add to that, or maybe me thinking that he would know a little bit about that. Um, but as we look at that going forward, I don't know. Are there any thoughts or comments into that perspective? I just thought it was interesting that his testimony going forward wouldn't have included some of that stuff, but yet Philip was able to preach Jesus, to give him the faith enough to be immersed, and that this man, this Ethiopian, then would uh, be a messenger going back into Egypt. So I don't know if you guys found that interesting, but I kind of thought that was interesting to think about that from uh, the Ethiopian's perspective. So there you go. I was going to read that last time, but get it. Any thoughts or comments before we jump into verse 9? Chapter 9? All right, chapter 9 of Acts. Now Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And it came about that as he journeyed, he was approaching Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. And he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and it shall be told you what you must do. And the men who traveled with him stood speechless, but seeing no one. Or stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. And Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. And leading him by the hand, they brought him into Damascus. And he was there 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias, and and he said, Behold, here I am, Lord. And the Lord said to him, Arise and go to the street called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judas for a man of Tarsus named Saul. For behold, he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in, lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he did to the saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priests to bind all who call upon thy name. But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to bear my name before the Gentiles and the kings and the sons of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias departed, entered the house, after laying hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road by which you were coming, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales. He regained his sight, and he rose and was immersed. And he took food and was strengthened. We'll stop there. Just wanted to read that full part, get a little bit of context. But before we get much into the detail here, let's just give a little bit of background review on Saul. If you flip over to Philippians. We'll just look at a few passages here. Since Saul is new to the story, other than Stephen, we were introduced to Saul at the persecution of and the death of Stephen. Philippians chapter 3, verse 4. I'll just start in verse 4. Although I myself might have confidence even in the flesh, if anyone else has mind to put confidence in the flesh, I far more. Circumcised the 8th day of the nation of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to the zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to the righteousness which is the law, found blameless. So we see here that Saul was a Jew, born of descendants of Benjamin. We know he was born in Tarsus of Cilicia. Remember Tarsus? We talked about some of this before. But Tarsus was one of the centers of the Greek learning that didn't quite rival Athens or um, Alexandria, but the Greek influence was quite a bit there. He was the son of a Pharisee. In fact, it's written that a lot of Saul's ancestors were from a line of Pharisees. Um, you didn't have to be born into a line of Pharisees. It came more from just being learned and taught. Sadducees had to be in your line, but a Pharisee you didn't have to be born into Pharisee. That's what I'm trying to say. Pharisee you could just have through training and belief. Sadducee you had to have it born into your line. Pharisees were more scattered, and the Sadducees pretty much were in Jerusalem. We read here a couple times in the scriptures, Paul or Saul calls himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. Both his parents were Jewish, so he was a real Hebrew, from a long line of Hebrews. Saul was a Roman citizen. In order to become a Roman citizen, you had to be born, in Roman lands. There were some you could buy your citizenship as well to be a Roman citizen. But Paul was born of Roman parents. He was born. He acquired his Roman citizenship at birth, having been born of both Jewish Roman citizens of Tarsus. If we remember back in Acts 5, we looked at Gamaliel. He was described. Gamaliel was a Pharisee, a teacher of the law. He was respected by all the people, stood up in the council and gave orders. Oh, sorry, yeah, that was reading the whole verse. But yeah, he was a teacher of the law, well respected Pharisee. And Gamaliel was a member of the Sanhedrin. And you'll see why I'm going over this here in a minute. But Gamaliel was considered one of the greatest teachers of the school of Hillel. Gamaliel was Hillel's grandson. Gamaliel was considered to be one of the 7 greatest teachers of all Judaism. And Saul studied under Gamaliel. So Saul would have been an expert in the doctrines and traditions of the Jewish faith and through the traditions of the Pharisees. Galatians, let's look at Galatians 1:14 real quick. And I'm kind of giving this background here on Saul you'll see why maybe here in a minute. Galatians chapter 1. Verse 14. Actually, we'll start in verse 13. It says, "For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions." So we get a little commentary from Saul here that um, he was beyond his contemporaries. He was a dedicated zealot. It says he was more extremely zealous for his ancestral traditions. He wasn't Saul wasn't just a um, common Jew. I mean, he was um, I was going to say brainwashed. That's not the right word, because up to then, his faith was, that was the faith. But um, um, he was a rock of the Jewish faith. He was smart. He was um, ahead of the people. I mean, he was on his way up the chain, studying under Gamaliel. Um, um, he was a force to be reckoned with, and you kind of see that at Stephen's death. Um, the picture I get is that uh, uh, Saul wasn't throwing the stones, but he was the guy standing there in authority. And they laid the robes at his feet of those stoning him, giving his full approval to the persecution and to the death of Stephen. So keep that in mind here. Go back to Acts chapter. No, let's not go. Let's not go there yet. We'll go there in a minute. But Acts chapter 22 will talk about uh, how Paul describes himself as being zealous for God. So as we go forward with Acts chapter 9, and we're seeing this account of Saul meeting Jesus on the road, it's just good to keep in mind that he would not have been an easy convert. He wouldn't have been some fly by night, oh yeah, I'm going to go there, and he's not going to be easily pushed by the wind, and he is also a great man of the faith. So in his conversion, um, how powerful is that going to be to take a man like him, not just a common guy? It's kind of like the Ethiopian that was just saved. I mean, they didn't just take some. I mean, God took an Ethiopian that was high in power and respect and converted him. And we're going to see, here we're seeing here that, Paul is of similar nature. He's not a common Jew. He was the real deal in Judaism. He was a scholar. He was devout in his faith. So much so that he was willing to persecute and there's no account that says he actually physically killed somebody, but we'll see in a couple other accounts here that he did cast his vote for killing and murdering Christians. So verse 1 says, Saul was still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. I'm back in Acts chapter 9. Went to the high priest, asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So the church, we know, had been scattered after Stephen. Um, it, uh, and Paul was pursuing under the authority of the high priest, trying to go find those, and they're described as the way here. I think I talked about that somewhere. But so that he can find these Christians, men and women, and bring them to Jerusalem. Um, I think what I'll do here is I'll skip ahead just a little bit. I'll hit Acts 22 and Acts 26 because Paul, in his words, in his testimony, he'll give us just a little bit more detail, or maybe a little said a little bit differently. But the things that Paul talks about, go and start flipping to Acts 22. Some of these things you talk about would have taken place between the time that Stephen died and now. So, yeah, so let's just look at 22, verse 3, starting in verse 3. Paul says here, I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, brought up, brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you are today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women into prisons. Also, as the high priest and the council of the elders can testify. From there, I received letters to the brethren and started off for Damascus in order to bring even those who were there in Jerusalem as prisoners to be punished. So we get another description of Paul, how he was zealous and how he persecuted the way until death, and how he was acting under the authority of the high priest to punish what they call here the way. Flip ahead to 26, Acts 26. Verse 9, I think. Yeah, verse 9. It says, so then I thought to myself that I had to do many things hostile to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And this is just what I did in Jerusalem. Not only did I lock up many of the saints in prisons, having received authority from the chief priests, but also when they were being put to death, I cast my vote against them. And as I punished them often in the synagogues, I tried to force them to blaspheme. And being furiously enraged at them, I kept pursuing them even to foreign cities. Saul's mission was to stomp out what he refers to as the way here, to stomp out Christianity. And we get a little more detail here. It says, but when they're being put to death, I cast my vote against them. We don't see anything written where we've been since Stephen's death that any more Christians were murdered in the scripture, but we know they had to have been. And we see here that Paul was being zealous. He was all in favor of putting these Christians to death. And they weren't called Christians yet, but he used that term. He tried to force them to blaspheme, to give reason. He was furiously enraged, and he kept pursuing them even to foreign cities. So we're getting just a little more background and maybe detail of, you know, Saul's passion and motive for the hate of these quote unquote Christians, or the way is what they were called. Um, and and we'll keep this in mind going forward, because I'll ask a question after a bit when he has this special meeting that we already read about. All this is going to kind of help us maybe think of what Paul might be going through. Any any thoughts or comments before we keep going here?
Say it would be really hard to trust all here. Stephen's relatives. You were close to any of the people were after he's converted. Now you're supposed to believe this guy. Not going to kill anybody else. It's been a really tough thing for Christians in Jerusalem in Damascus. Especially the little Barb, I would really have a tough time trusting this back.
Yeah, it seems to me like, he may not have been the only one, but it seemed like he was the point man in trying to track down the Jews carrying orders to round them up. Um, and I just keep thinking to myself, I mean, this guy was devoted to cleansing this religious rebellion through, murder, prison, persecution. It says, he's trying to, force them to say the wrong thing. That's like vengeance there. That's not, hey, this guy, believes in Jesus, so let's kill him. He's trying to, you know, um, trying to force them so that he can exact, vengeance on. If you're trying to force them or coerce them into saying, it's like trying to torture you almost to say what you want to hear so that you can put them to death or prison. Yeah. Yeah. Torture them, beating them, trying to, and through that torture and, fear, he's trying to spread fear, through those types of actions um, to those that would follow. So Saul was on a mission. In Acts 9, Acts 22, the term the way was used. Um, Luke describes it by the way, and I think that's just a maybe an early designation or title for the church or for the Christianity. I don't know for sure, but it seems to me like it would come back from the words of John, or from the book of John. He says, "I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." So maybe that was the term, the way, and how it was described. Just a thought there. But verse 3. And as he was traveling, it happened that he was approaching Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. And he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and it will be told what you must do. It's clear here that Jesus considers the persecution of Christians, of the faith, as an attack, as an attack and persecution on Jesus himself. He's taken full, responsibility or full authority in saying, you're attacking me. Let's flip to Acts 22:6. We're going to look at a couple of these a little bit. It's kind of going to give a similar account, but there's more detail. As it's not, Luke writes his account and Paul comes back and he kind of tells the stories. It's not a different story, and it's not conflicting. It's just, um, if you're telling a story, about a hunting trip, there's details that you say and details that you don't. You talk to somebody else, so their details are important, but there's just a few other details that we'll kind of just look through here. Acts 22 verse 6 says, "But it happened that as I was on my way approaching Damascus about noontime, a very bright light suddenly flashed from heaven all around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus the Nazarene, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me saw the light, to be sure, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Get up, go into Damascus, and there you'll be told of all that has been appointed for you to do. But since I could not see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me, and came into Damascus. So we see those guys that were with him um, saw the light as well, to be sure, but they didn't understand. And Paul was the only one that was blinded, because the others led him uh, to Damascus. Who were his companions that were there? It doesn't really say, but if he's on authority from the chief priests, I mean, they could have been Roman soldiers. They could have been other Jews assisting Paul. It doesn't really say, um, but they could have been other religious zealots. It could have been Roman soldiers traveling with them to help him in the arresting of these people. It's hard to say, but um, Acts 26, verse 12. While so engaged as I was journeying to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests, at midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining all around me and those who were journeying with me. And when all had fallen to the ground, I heard the voice say to me in Hebrew dialect, maybe that's why uh, they were maybe Romans, Roman soldiers, maybe, because they didn't understand Hebrew. Um, anyway, in Hebrew dialect, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, Who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up, stand on your feet. For this purpose I have appeared to you, to appoint you a minister and a witness, not only to the things which you have seen, but also the things in which I will appear to you, rescuing you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from the darkness to the light and from the dominion of Satan to God, and they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among those who have been sanctified by faith in me. So it's clear that resurrected Jesus here appears to Saul. He says, "For this purpose I appeared to you." We'll talk about that some more in just a minute. Well, the commentaries I was reading it, some would take the point to say that those faith only, would say that he was saved after Jesus appeared to him and he kind of submitted. But we'll see as we go forward. That's not the case. Kick against the goads. That term, kick against the goads, in the New King James or the King James, it uses that term in Acts chapter 9 and Acts 26, but in the New American Standard, it only has that account in Acts 26. So I'm assuming maybe there was a couple differences in the manuscripts. I couldn't really figure out why King James put it in Acts chapter 9 as well. Are you familiar with that at all? The kick against the goads? Yeah. Well, either way, it's in there. Yeah, it's in there in the Greek. But he says, "I am Jesus whom you're persecuting. It's hard for you to kick against the goads." Does anybody know what a goad is? Goad, the goats. Um, um, the goad was an ox goad. It was a sharp piece of iron stuck to the end of a heavy stick with which an ox is urged on. The other end of the 8-foot stick was flat for cleaning of the plowshare. It could be used as a formidable weapon as well. The expression "to kick against the goad" is derived from the action of a stubborn or unyielding ox kicking against the goad. The ox would gain nothing by kicking against the goad, and would injure no one but itself. So the expression would make known Saul's futile attempt to kick against Jesus, to kick against the church. It's futile. The more, Saul kicks against the church or kicks against Jesus, the more powerful, maybe, the church is going to become. So that's kind of the term, is that it's futile. Using an 8-foot stick, you're just trying to get the ox moving, and the ox isn't going to like it, and he's going to kick and not like it, but it's futile in its attempt to do so. It needs to, just move forward. So that was just a thought there. I had to definitely look that up. I thought it was something like that, but anyway, that's the thought about kicking against the goad that it mentions there in verse 26, or in chapter 26. Before we leave chapter 26, I think it's good that we talk about here Saul's purpose. Why was Jesus, what was Jesus's purpose of this encounter with Saul? What did he have in mind? In verse 16, says, "For this purpose I have appeared to you, to appoint you a minister and a witness, not only to the things which you have seen, but to the things which I will appear to you." So he's going to appoint Saul to be a minister, um, and a witness of things that he has seen and things that he will see. So it seems that Jesus is promising him, you know, further revelation. Um, and up, and maybe to qualify him as an apostle, um, to the Gentiles. See, I mean, to be an apostle, um, all the apostles had seen the resurrected Jesus. Well, Paul wouldn't have seen the resurrected Jesus, or Saul. I'm using them interchangeably, but he's still referred to as Saul here. But Jesus appears to him, and it's clear from the accounts that he must have seen the risen Jesus, um, and he would have had to bear witness to his ministry. Um, Verse 17. Well, the end, 16 says, "But also to things which I will appear to you." So it seems Jesus is going to give revelation to get Saul up to speed, for lack of a better word. Verse 17, "Delivering you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you." And this 18 kind of is given his purpose here, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the dominion of Satan to God, they may receive forgiveness of sin and inheritance among those who have been sanctified by faith in me. So this is what this is going to be Saul's purpose. To open the eyes of the Gentiles. Any thoughts? Um, Romans 11:13. Paul says, "But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry." So several different times Paul refers to himself as an apostle to the Gentiles. So Paul had a purpose. It wasn't just for individual salvation. Jesus didn't come specifically just to save his soul. Um, Jesus had a great purpose for the Apostle Paul. Any thoughts as we move forward there?
Paul had great passion for what he did before. So I think we do that we have that passion, zealous for God himself, and be devoted to that. Um, we do it that much zealous
Yeah. Did you raise your hand? X.
I was
Or go ahead.
moment Jesus, I always thought it was like I had a Colorado had headlights. I pulled one of the headlights off and put an aircraft landing light in. That's something coming at me, doesn't dim. Oh man, it just blinded you. I always thought well, it was like a spotlight just blinding. Oh, but when you read this out, it was all around him and all the men who were with him. So that was Jesus in glory. We talk about Jesus dwelling in inapproachable light. No man hath seen or can see. That light, presence of Jesus, Micah says he appeared to you. It just blinded Saul. That's the glory of Jesus. And I think that the impression that God is making on him, and he says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Paul was persecuting Christians, was persecuting the church. Jesus said, why are you persecuting me? You brought that point out. What you do to Jesus, what you're doing to the church.
And vice versa, yeah.
Yeah, you can slap me, but you better not slap Barb. I'll turn the other cheek, but you slap her, there's going to be 2 hits. But you persecute Jesus' church, you're in big trouble. But it works both ways. You know, the things that we do, Steve coming in the morning and making the coffee and all that he and Marion do for the church, and that for Jesus. And so the church is highly esteemed and valued by Jesus. It's his bride. We need to have the same attitude. What we do to our brothers and sisters and for the church, we are doing for Jesus. Do your work heartily as unto the Lord, the scripture says. So if you're doing cleaning up the church building, you're doing that for Jesus. So we really, you see in this the high regard that Jesus has for his church, and we need to have that same regard for the church. It seems to be like a lot of people don't, well, I just like watching Oral Roberts used to be on the TV on Sunday morning. People would stay home and watch Oral Roberts instead of going to church. Now you can just stay home and watch it on YouTube. That's not the same as being here with God's people. Yeah, if you're sick, yeah, you gotta stay home. But if you're just lazy, you gotta want to get up, go to the assembly, and you're being lazy on Jesus. We need to put our efforts into the church as if we're putting our efforts there for Jesus. If Jesus was here, because Psalm 22, read it from the book of Hebrews, Steve did this morning. It says, I will proclaim the praises of God in the assembly. So if Jesus showed up in person here in the assembly, stay home, watch it on YouTube. Jesus is here.
Yeah.
And we really need to do what we do for the church like we were doing it for Jesus. Jesus is our elder brother and he's here.
Yeah, we definitely going through Acts, you see the zeal and the start of the church, and you get the, you know, you got the epistles and you know how to set things up, but really, it's no different. Our zeal for the church today shouldn't be any less than um, the apostles and the disciples thousands of years ago. But yeah, we do tend to just be pew sitters, um, go to church once a week, and somebody else is going to take care of everything else. I mean, my part is to hear the word and to hear the word of God, and hopefully I can do better next week. But it's a bigger picture than that. It's a bigger picture of what we should see, and we definitely kind of get that from uh, Paul's account. He's got a bigger picture coming of what his purpose is and what's our purpose for the church. Being a pew sitter, it's just me, 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 me. Help me do better. But and all that's good. I mean, we all want to be better at a better Christian. We sin out of our lives, quit doing things that we shouldn't do. But that's a pretty selfish aspect, and maybe you got to work on yourself first before you can start. Um, but pretty soon, Paul's going to be zealous for Jesus, and he's going to work tirelessly his entire life to pursue. So it's a bigger picture. So something to think about. That's all I had this morning. You're welcome.